Imagine your paycheck dying before you finish lunch. By sunset, it buys half as much. Now, scale that feeling to 30 million people living on top of the world's largest oil reserves.
Facing many of the same restrictions the U.S. has historically imposed on Cuba and North Korea.
Political and economic crisis in Venezuela, the hyperinflation, the food shortages, the political polarization.
The resource-rich nation has the highest inflation rate in the world.
This is Venezuela, a country with more oil than Saudi Arabia, Russia, or the United States. Over 300 billion barrels beneath its soil. In 1950, it was the fourth richest country in the world, wealthier than Japan, Germany, or Spain. It had the world at its feet. Today, it's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. Inflation once hit 130,000%. Its GDP has collapsed by more than 80%, and over 7 million people, nearly a quarter of the population, have fled. How does that happen? How does the richest resource-rich nation on Earth destroy itself from the inside out? This isn't just mismanagement. It's a blueprint for how to dismantle a modern economy, piece by piece. To see how prosperity planted the collapse, we start at the wellhead, where oil changed everything. The discovery of oil in Venezuela in 1914 fundamentally altered the country's trajectory. It catapulted a previously agrarian economy into one flush with revenue almost overnight. By the 1950s, Venezuela had surpassed most Latin American nations in GDP per capita, literacy, and urbanization. It attracted immigrants from Europe, built modern infrastructure, and became a democratic beacon in the region. Caracas, with its modernist architecture and bustling oil-financed development, was often referred to as the Dubai of Latin America. In 1960, Venezuela co-founded OPEC alongside oil giants like Saudi Arabia and Iran, marking its arrival as a geopolitical player. Oil revenue empowered successive governments to invest in healthcare, education, and transportation. Public sector jobs ballooned, imports boomed, poverty fell. From 1950 to 1975, GDP per capita increased by over 80% in real terms. Within several decades, Venezuela was among the world's top 10 oil producers, and oil accounted for 90% of exports, a staggering level of reliance on a single commodity. This immense reliance on a single commodity laid the groundwork for long-term instability. But even in those golden decades, signs of imbalance were visible. Moreover, the bolivar, Venezuela's national currency, appreciated significantly due to the flood of petrodollars, leading to what economists call Dutch disease. The strong bolivar affected other industries, with agriculture's contribution to GDP declining from 20% in 1950 to just 6% by 1978. Manufacturing also stagnated, and other export-oriented sectors became less profitable. With an entire economy revolved around a volatile commodity, domestic producers couldn't compete with cheap imports made affordable by the overvalued currency. This created a dangerous monoculture. Venezuela exported oil and imported nearly everything else. Despite temporary prosperity, the seeds of collapse were being sown as early as the 1930s. When oil prices fluctuated, which they inevitably did, the entire economy trembled. And without any serious attempt to diversify, no significant reinvestment into non-oil sectors, no sovereign wealth fund, no fiscal rules, every bust was worse than the last. The economy became highly centralized, with the state wielding disproportionate power supported by oil rents. This dynamic made governance less accountable to the people because leaders no longer needed to rely on taxes to fund public programs. The result was a disconnect between the state and its citizens, a foundation for corruption and inefficiency. So, while the skyscrapers of Caracas touched the clouds, the foundations beneath were already eroding. The oil was flowing, but so was complacency. But underneath that growth, the seeds of collapse were already sown. Oil money made the good times great, until good times became the plan. Throughout the mid-20th century, Venezuela experienced periodic booms thanks to rising oil prices. From the 1950s to the early 1980s, the government used oil windfalls to fund ambitious infrastructure and social programs. Middle-class wealth expanded rapidly. By 1977, the middle class made up nearly 60% of the population, the largest in Latin America. Caracas had one of the highest standards of living in the developing world. But there was a problem. They didn't save a cent. Instead of investing in long-term development, the government expanded inefficient public programs. Public sector employment skyrocketed, not to meet the needs of the country, but to distribute oil wealth through patronage. Entire industries became dependent on state subsidies. Worse, a culture of short-termism and clientelism took root. Economic planning was focused on keeping people content in the present, rather than building a stable future. The 1973 oil shock temporarily flooded the treasury, and wages, subsidies, and employment surged. But when prices fell in the 1980s, the government was left with massive deficits. The 1983 currency devaluation, known as Black Friday, was a national trauma. Imported goods became unaffordable overnight, foreign debt ballooned, and inflation began to spiral. The government turned to capital controls and multiple exchange rates, giving rise to black markets and arbitrage. The economic model was fundamentally broken, but reforms were delayed out of political fear. By the 1990s, Venezuela was deeply indebted, plagued by inflation, and no longer able to mask its problems with oil. But this was just the beginning. In the wake of economic turmoil, the public lost faith in the traditional political elite. Into this void stepped Hugo Chavez. Elected in 1998, Chavez promised to end corruption, empower the poor, and redistribute wealth. His rhetoric was populist, and his timing was perfect. Oil prices were beginning to climb again, giving him the resources to fund sweeping changes. He rewrote the Constitution, centralized power, and launched the Bolivarian Revolution, a political project aimed at dismantling what he saw as a corrupt elite establishment and transforming Venezuela into a socialist state. Chavez's government rewrote the Constitution in 1999, centralizing power and expanding presidential authority. This rhetoric was anti-imperialist and populist. He used PDVSA, the state-owned oil company, as a cash pipeline to fund expansive social programs and keep political loyalty intact. After a major strike at PDVSA in 2002 to 2003, Chavez fired over 18,000 skilled workers, about 40% of the company's staff. These were engineers, technicians, and managers. In their place, he installed loyalists with little expertise. The result was a dramatic drop in operational efficiency. PDVSA's oil production, which averaged 3.5 million barrels per day in the late 1990s, began a long, steep decline. Chavez launched over 30 missions, state-run social programs funded by oil money. These included Mission Barrio Adentro, free healthcare, Mission Robinson, adult literacy, and Mission Mercal, food subsidies. For a while, these programs yielded results. According to the UN, poverty fell from 49% in 1998 to 27% in 2012. Extreme poverty dropped from 21% to 7% in the same period. But these gains were not built on sustainable economics. Nearly 95% of Venezuela's export revenue during Chavez's presidency came from oil. Government spending more than doubled from 18% of GDP in 1998 to over 34% by 2012. Chavez nationalized key industries and introduced strict price controls to fight inflation. But this backfired. Companies couldn't operate profitably under these controls and shut down or went underground. Production plummeted. the country still failed to diversify its economy or save during boom years. Between the early 2000s and mid-2010s, oil prices hovered above $30 per barrel, peaking at $110 in 2011. This masked the growing rot underneath. Infrastructure maintenance was ignored. Corruption within PDVSA escalated. Government officials exploited the dual exchange rate system to siphon billions through currency arbitrage. The country ranked 165 out of 180 in Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index by the time Chavez died in 2013. There was no backup plan, no fiscal cushion, no diversification, just a political project hooked on oil, powered by populism, and built on fragile foundations. Venezuela's economy was already teetering. What appeared as growth was simply oil-fueled illusion. Then the tide went out. The printing presses roared, and the illusion broke. After Chavez's death, Nicolas Maduro assumed power. The collapse began with a whisper, not a scream. Oil prices began to slide in late 2014. By January 2016, prices had crashed to below $30 per barrel, a 70% drop from the $100 plus highs seen during Chavez's final years. For an economy where oil made up 95% of export earnings and over 50% of government revenue, this was catastrophic. Between 2013 and 2020, Venezuela's oil export revenues fell by more than 93% in real terms. With no sovereign wealth fund and no diversified industries, the government turned to the printing press. The central bank began monetizing the deficit, injecting bolivars into the economy without backing. Hyperinflation soon followed. People's savings were wiped out, and salaries became worthless. In 2014, inflation hit 69%. In 2016, it surpassed 274%. In 2018, it reached an astronomical 130,000%. That year, the Venezuelan government lopped 5 zeros off the bolivar and introduced a new currency, the Bolivar Soberano. It didn't work. The country could no longer import essentials because it lacked the foreign currency. With domestic production gutted and imports restricted, scarcity ruled daily life. The bolivar continued to plummet. Prices changed daily, then hourly. A cup of coffee that cost 450 bolivars in the morning might cost 1,000 by night. Citizens lost faith in the currency and turned to the US dollar, despite official bans. A black market thrived. Government-imposed price controls led to empty shelves, long queues, and widespread hoarding. By 2020, the economy had contracted by over 80% compared to its 2013 size. GDP per capita fell from over $12,000 in 2012 to under $2,000 in 2020 in constant US dollars. Amid the chaos, basic infrastructure crumbled. Power outages became routine. Hospitals ran out of medicine. Tap water became unreliable. Education systems collapsed. Teachers, unpaid for months, simply stopped showing up. According to the World Food Program, by 2021, 1 in 3 Venezuelans was food insecure. Despite still sitting atop the world's largest oil reserves, Venezuela could no longer extract or refine efficiently. Years of mismanagement, corruption, and underinvestment had gutted PDVSA. Skilled workers fled. Foreign partnerships dissolved. Sanctions by the US, imposed in phases starting 2017, accelerated the decline by cutting access to capital and oil markets. But even without sanctions, the collapse was already underway. Corruption, overdependence on oil, and the hollowing out of institutions had done most of the damage. And still, there was oil, but the country couldn't extract it. Skilled workers had fled. Foreign investment evaporated. Sanctions, both justified and strategically imposed, isolated Venezuela further. Hyperinflation isn't just math, it's chaos. When prices won't stay put, nothing else can. This wasn't only numbers, it was management, and and the dismantling of guardrails. As the economy shrank, power concentrated. Unlike Norway, which invested oil revenues into the world's largest sovereign wealth fund, valued at over $1.6 trillion as of 2025, Venezuela embezzled or wasted its surplus. While Norway followed the 4% rule, using only a small portion of investment returns to fund government spending, Venezuela burned through $750 billion in oil revenues between 2003 and 2013, with little to show. Venezuela never established a credible long-term savings mechanism. Its attempts at stabilization funds, like Fonden, were poorly managed, lacked transparency, and became slush funds for populist projects. Billions simply disappeared. An audit by the National Assembly in 2016 estimated over $300 billion had been lost to corruption over the previous decade. Transparency International consistently ranks Venezuela among the top 10 most corrupt countries in the world. In 2023, it ranked 177 out of 180, below nations like North Korea and Somalia. Embezzlement, bribery, and procurement fraud were not side effects. They were standard procedure. In 2007, Chavez announced the nationalization of the telecommunications, electricity, and cement sectors. By 2010, thousands of private businesses had been expropriated or nationalized, often without compensation. This gutted investor confidence. Foreign direct investment collapsed from $4.5 billion in 2008 to under $300 million by 2016. The judiciary, once semi-independent, was packed with loyalists. Legal certainty evaporated. Contracts became meaningless. Political opponents were routinely harassed, detained, or disqualified from elections. Press freedom deteriorated rapidly. Over 100 media outlets were shut down or censored between 2013 and 2023. Meanwhile, public services crumbled. By 2020, less than 20% of the country's hospitals had regular access to clean water or electricity. Teachers earned less than $10 per month. Vaccination rates dropped. Outbreaks of measles and malaria returned after decades of eradication. The government, increasingly desperate, resorted to repression, censorship, and militarized control. Elections lost legitimacy. Protesters were jailed. Each year, the country lost more of its productive capacity. Transparency was replaced by secrecy. Rule of law was replaced by decree, and confidence shattered. Venezuela, once a symbol of Latin American prosperity, had become a textbook case of state failure. Remove checks and balances, and you don't tame chaos, you industrialize it. So what fixes a broken balance sheet and a broken social contract? The oil is still there. The question is whether trust can be rebuilt to touch it. This begs the question, is there a way back? Recovery is theoretically possible. Venezuela still holds the world's largest proven oil reserves. It has a diaspora of skilled workers. It has arable land and a young population. Today, Venezuela's economy is dollarized in practice, reliant on humanitarian aid, and supported by remittances sent by its diaspora, over $4 billion annually. Its government clings to power, but its legitimacy is paper thin. But to recover, it must do what it has avoided for decades: embrace reform. The country needs to restore independent institutions, reestablish rule of law, and eliminate corruption. It must stabilize its currency, remove arbitrary price controls, and build trust with investors. Above all, it needs a transparent and accountable government. Some changes are beginning. The economy is slowly re-dollarizing. Informal markets are expanding. But these are band-aids, not cures. Without systemic reform, these small improvements will wither. More than anything, Venezuela needs time and political will. It must confront its history, acknowledge its failures, and chart a new path. That process will be painful. It'll take years, but if done right, Venezuela can rise again. The question is whether it has the courage to do so. Venezuela didn't just run out of money, it ran out of trust, out of foresight, out of time. Oil was never the problem. Oil was the lottery ticket, the golden key. But wealth alone doesn't build nations. Institutions do. Rule of law does. Leadership, above all, does. Norway struck oil and became a model of stability. Venezuela struck oil and set itself on fire. This is more than a story of inflation or mismanagement. It's a story of what happens when a government forgets how to govern, when power replaces planning, and when politics becomes more important than people. The oil is still there. The question is, can Venezuela rebuild the trust to touch it again? Until then, it remains the greatest economic failure of the 21st century.